Good morning, everybody. Master Sukuri coming to you from Tokyo, Japan, episode 48. I've got a nice podcast organized for you today. Today, I want to talk a little bit about what's been going on over the last week. And it's really been a great opportunity for me to reflect on my own growth. As always, I'm always reflecting. And I'll be using points in different conversations I've had with different people. Of course, I won't mention their names because I don't want anyone to feel embarrassed or uncomfortable because I put it in. But everybody that I talk to, I feel is a really intelligent person, and I really enjoy talking to people in the capoeira lifestyle and the capoeira path. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit more about mentorship, something that I talked about this week with somebody. I want to talk a little bit about the importance of building community and how it's different for people who are native Portuguese speakers. And this will be a reflection of what we talked about with Mestre Vibes on his podcast, a live streaming that I did this week. So let me jump right into it and let's get started. So on Wednesday morning of this week, Mestre Vibes invited me to be on his podcast, and it's in Portuguese. And we were talking a lot about his main point of the podcast was to interview me with how did I get to where I am, and how would I define success and how it works for me. Directly, it wasn't that question, but like how can people, primarily for him, it's Brazilian capoeira teachers, because his whole customer base is pretty much 99.9% Brazilian teachers in Brazil and around the world. He had asked, how do you get to success? And it was funny because it was the same conversation I had when I was mentoring somebody this week who is a non-Brazilian teaching capoeira. And we had about an hour and a half conversation. And it's really interesting how inside the capoeira world, which I'm sure happens a lot in other cultural arts, is we tend to want to make people feel better instead of wanting to help people grow, if that makes any sense. So people will tell you, people will tell you, oh, you're doing really good, and don't worry if you're not doing that good right now. As long as you feel good about what you're doing and how you're moving forward, then that's what's most important. And I think that's fine if you're doing it as a completely volunteer approach. For example, if I was teaching capoeira twice a week at a park and I didn't have to charge any money and it was just my fun time and I had a passion to do it, then I don't even think it would come up in the conversation for someone to need to tell me, oh, you only have 4 or 5 students, so think about all the people you've influenced, you've come across, all the people you've touched in your life, and how many people you've affected. And I think about that, and I think how prevalent that is in contemporary society, and I think how much of a worthless joke that is, right? Who's going to tell someone that who's actually moving forward? I deal with a lot of people, and generally, here's a little side note I wanted to talk about. I'm always asked, how important is it for non-Brazilians to learn Portuguese to go up in capoeira? It's not essential, but if you want to know what's going on in the main part of capoeira, if you have no interest, which I see most people don't, then if you want to know what's going on with development of capoeira, cultural understanding, and all these different things, then you need to speak Portuguese to a certain level. What level that is depends on each person. But if you don't worry about it. And most of my students don't speak Portuguese, and a lot of it is because they lack access. Although, for example, I know several of my students who have read, 20, 30 capoeira books, who follow other capoeira people who know a lot of words in Portuguese, but because of lack of opportunity, they don't speak Portuguese fluently. And a little bit more, I get more, not irritated, but when people say you need to speak Portuguese, to what level? I know people who speak Japanese, and I've been here for 25 years in Japan, and it's so academic that it sounds strange to normal Japanese people because they'll tell me like, well, their Japanese is really good, but they use words that nobody uses because it's a studied Japanese. It doesn't mean it's bad, but they'll never sit in the middle of the night talking to somebody face to face, old school, if they talk that way, because people need to feel comfortable with the mode of communication, be it Japanese or Portuguese or English or whatever. So, do you need Portuguese to go up in capoeira? No. This is my opinion. But if you want to be a part of that higher echelon of capoeira, especially as a non-Brazilian, then you do need to speak Portuguese. And I'm always seeing from the Brazilian Portuguese side, guys, I'm sorry, this is a cultural commodity. People are selling it. They either want to get money because it's their job, or they want social or cultural clout and influence. So if you're not inside of that Brazilian side, which you don't have to be, and a lot of people say, I don't really care, and that's fine. But if you want to be at that level where you're sitting with, like, say, Mestre Acordeon, Mestre Boa Gente, Mestre Val, Mestre Ney, sitting with a lot of these people and speaking Portuguese is the only way you're going to be accepted as best as possible. And people will always make excuses. Well, I don't need other people's validation. No, that's fine. But I'm saying, if you want to be accepted where they no longer overtly try to take advantage of you and consider you a friend in capoeira as a co-mastery or as another mastery in the same field, just like any industry. If you want to be at that level, then you need to be at that level. For example, if you're a Harvard anthropologist, you're not going to go down and hang out with someone who just took one course in anthropology or one course in anthropology at the junior college level, right? It's just common sense, right? Someone who works 20 years in the IT industry is not going to talk to somebody who says, oh, I like gaming, or I just started YouTubing, and say, oh, we're on the same level. But because of capoeira, people tend to do that. And a lot of that is a result because the education level that is the foundation of capoeira culture worldwide from the Brazilian side is very, very humble, very, very low. And because of that, we tend to have a capoeira culture of not really, where anyone can say anything, anyone can do anything, and the only recourse is cultural exclusion or bullying. Now, if we want to talk what I'm talking about today, I'm talking at a level of somewhat intellectual, somewhat academic, somewhat mature, somewhat intelligent level, and we need to talk about how that affects. So, if you want to be able to be at that table and not have someone translate and be able to learn, then you've got to put the time into the Portuguese language so that you can better the language. And this is interesting because there's a lot more opportunity outside of Japan to practice Portuguese unless you live in a predominantly Brazilian community in Japan. For example, I'm going next month to Hamamatsu, and everything is written in Portuguese. I know a lot of Brazilians who live in Hamamatsu who never speak, except for basic communication like yes, no, I understand, tomorrow, today, like word conversation, because they never need to use it. At the factories that they work at the jobs they work at, everything is translated and written and done in Portuguese. It's manual labor, factory work, so it's a little bit more, what can I say? It's like every day it's almost the same thing. So you're on an assembly line. But if you want to hang out, if you want to talk, if you want to be at that level, people always say, why don't Brazilians give you that respect, or the racist component from Brazilians for not letting foreigners go up in capoeira? Some of them are just, some people are just uneducated and will use racism or cultural barriers to not let you have any power. But the people who are more open, the people who are more positive, the people who are more interested in seeing the positive growth of capoeira will let you in. But when you knock on the door, they have to be able to understand what you're saying. For example, do you have the password? Do you have the word of this? If you can't sit at a table with mestres and mastras and talk about capoeira at the same level as two people who speak no Portuguese, who've done capoeira only from YouTube and hanging out. It's a different level. And no, the value isn't the same. If the value was the same, then everybody would just learn from YouTube. And as you progress, you really need to understand that you don't have to be part of that world. You don't have to be part of that. Like, I don't have to sit at the master table. I enjoy capoeira. I'm doing everything I can. That's fine. But at the same time, you cannot expect to be included. This is capoeira. I've noticed the more people try to make it social and open, the more conflict it has, the more low quality it comes. Imagine if you started doing karate and you say, okay, but we're not going to punch as hard because I'm worried that this person won't be my friend after training. Or if you do Brazilian jiu-jitsu and you're like, okay, I'm not going to make the person tap out. I'm not going to choke as hard because I don't want them to not like me later. And the Brazilian side of capoeira is very intense. And if you're at that level, that's the only way you're going to get better. And I see it because I see a lot of capoeira on YouTube and when I travel that wouldn't stand the scrutiny or wouldn't stand the level of a first or second year person in Brazil, in my opinion. And this is because they're training to be social capoeira versus capoeira for the roda. And it's not bad. I'm not saying that the culture is exactly the same. You can be more friendly. You can be more inclusive. That has nothing to do with capoeira. I always say, I always put capoeira first, and I'm happy when I can make social friends outside of capoeira, from capoeira. Great. But just because someone does capoeira doesn't mean that I have to like them. And there's the different levels of capoeira. And this week I was talking to somebody in a mentorship, and I was telling them, one of the points said the reason that the person had mentioned that they feel very disconnected and not understanding the capoeira world even after 10 years of practice. And I said, unfortunately, the way I see it is because there's no capoeira culture in Asia. It doesn't really exist. Very few small points. And the reason is there's not that many Brazilians in Asia doing capoeira. Shiru in Korea is an amazing person. And when we get together, the dynamic is very different than when he interacts with the Korean teachers and the way the Korean teachers interact with each other. Good or bad, it's just, I'm talking from a cultural aspect. Not saying that person doesn't have value, that person doesn't have any value, but that don't overestimate the value in capoeira. Imagine it's like someone who did a little bit of jiu-jitsu grappling, but for 10 years they've been watching videos. You do need the hands-on and you do need the experience. And you do need the practical interaction of doing the training. And that's a very big difference and something that I don't really see. The person that I mentored yesterday had mentioned that, in Asia, it's pretty much the same people all the time. And I said, well, that's because they've grown and people a lot of times in Asia have done capoeira for a long time, but they haven't grown in capoeira. Simple things that we would see in capoeira schools in Europe or in America, in my opinion, right, are things that are completely non-existent in Asian capoeira. And the reason is, again, because there's no Brazilians here in general. If you go to East Coast, masters were falling out of trees in a way. And I mean that because I can go to the United States, to New York, and I can end up doing workshops at 10, 15 different places in the United States. I could travel for 2-3 months doing workshops in the United States if I wanted to, because there's so many masteries that I connect with. And for them, especially the Brazilian masteries, I'm a point of reference to say to non-Brazilian students, okay, look at this level. Here's someone who actually put in all the work, not only in the physical aspect, but in the musical, the cultural, the historical, the philosophical, and the linguistic side. What would it take to get a PhD in capoeira? I'm curious. And it's really important that you're hitting all the aspects of capoeira if you want to be accepted at the Mestre table. They will accept you, but generally from what I see, because I come from that culture, I come from the street culture, I come from the exploitive culture, and for me, I recognize that maybe it's my own stereotype, maybe it's my own, how could I say, it's my own way of dealing, or maybe I'm broken, but I see people getting exploited under the guise of friendliness. Right? For example, one of the biggest things, one of my master friends here in Japan posted years ago and he was a Brazilian guy who just got irritated with all of it. He's like, all the masteries and professors and the people who come once a year to Japan give cordons, get paid, chase the girls, and get out, and they don't care what's the trash is left in Japan with capoeira. That's something that he had said on his social media, and I'm repeating that because that always stuck with me, right? And if you have, because that master was somebody who stayed in Brazil, who grew up with capoeira and came to Japan when they were already, what I want to say is mentally graduated in capoeira, not formado in technique, because I don't know if he came as formado, but I'm assuming he did. But mentally from them means like a very strong understanding of Brazilian capoeira culture. When you come to like Asia, people come and they're enamored with this idea of coming to, for example, Japan and Asia, and they end up falling in love with the idea of being here and being, quote unquote, contributing when actually they're just here as tourists. And Asia loves tourists. Come here, give me my validation, give me my cordon, get out. Here's your money. I've paid for it, so I'm accredited. And most Asian countries have that, especially, in my opinion, Japan and Korea. It's very strong. And I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that that's what I see. I am actively trying to educate my students and the people that I come in contact, that I have influence over, to give them a better understanding. But sometimes you have to accept that some people just don't care for that side. You can do everything you want. Some people are just going to be clients. Some people, like it or not, some people are going to be clients who just want to culturally appropriate. Some people are going to be alumnos or students who want to just come and enjoy the social, the fun, the physical, the artistic, and done. That's fine. What I'm talking to today is about the discípulo, right? The disciple. If you want to be the disciple, you need the vivencia, you need the cohabitational growth with the person you're learning capoeira with and the people around you. Vivencia is not just the vivencia with your master, but the vivencia is also with the people around you, and how you need to realize as a disciple or a disciple, or someone who's very dedicated on that level of capoeira, you have to really realize that you're doing the extra work over the other people. You need to value, right? In Portuguese, tem que valorizar. You have to value what you're doing. If you're waking up in the morning, if you're training, if you're learning music, if you're studying the songs, and now, honestly, I really feel that not learning Portuguese is a choice, especially if you're in Asia, because you can afford, unless you're like, it's financially not feasible. But for example, if you're in Japan, if you're in Korea, you can afford to get online. It's cheap. Find a Portuguese teacher in Brazil and start studying. Again, I've said this before. It's the value you put into it. You don't have to, but don't expect to be considered like you did. A lot of people in capoeira today feel like because they've been doing it for a while, that they have certain right to a certain status. You get nothing from capoeira. Only you get what you earned. If you only earned superficial cultural appropriation, copying from YouTube, well, that's the status you're going to get with anyone who knows better. If you don't care, that's fine. But don't expect to be given value if you haven't put in the work. People have time for everything except capoeira growth. That's fine. But to the people who've put the time in, we're not going to give you the value because you haven't done it. I'm not going to treat you like a PhD or in my case, a master's degree in cultural anthropology if you've never taken one anthropology course. If you only took a bunch of other courses, but you never did anthropology, how can I value you in that specialization or in this industry? So the mentorship ended up with me basically saying, you need to understand that the reason you don't feel like you understand capoeira culture or capoeira world is because you haven't been exposed to it, actually. You haven't, I told the person that you haven't been exposed to it because you don't live in it. Now, why don't you live in it? Is because everyone here, in my opinion, validates each other because they all lack the direction. I know no one. I asked the person yesterday, and I'm not going to talk about Japan today. I'm talking about outside of Japan. How many teachers of capoeira in Asia, outside of Japan, speak Portuguese? And this person travels a lot, knows the whole community. Says none. Now, when I say speaks Portuguese, I mean, for example, someone who can do an interview in Portuguese, because that's the level we're talking about. We're talking about fluency. I'm not talking about somebody who can Google Translate in their head, because I meet a lot of people who quote unquote speak Portuguese, but they don't. They're Google translated in their head. And that happens a lot. And I mean, a lot of people like that, they can't. But people say, oh, they speak Portuguese. No, they don't. They don't. They don't speak capoeira. There's a certain level that only people who speak that level, even Brazilians can be. When I first started capoeira, a lot of Brazilians, oh, I'm Brazilian. I know capoeira. Oh, I'm Brazilian. Then once you start to mature and get to a level and you speak, they no longer speak. Now people say, oh, ask Mestre Sucuri or ask Sucuri, because they know that that's a level that I have that they don't have. It's like speaking at an academic level when you only have junior high education. Most Brazilians I meet can't speak about capoeira because they've never done it. They haven't put the time in. They don't know anything. Just because they speak the language doesn't mean they speak capoeira. I think that's something I'm going to keep moving forward with in our next podcast. What does it mean to speak capoeira, right? I speak capoeira language. Okay, guys, I'm going to leave it there for today because it's just been super busy and I'm super happy with everything I've done. I'd like to give out a big shout out and remind everyone, Contra Mestre Vaquero just released his new single, and I'll put the link here in Patreon. His new CD is coming out in, I want to say July or June, I can't remember right offhand, but he is one of my favorite capoeira singers. He's an excellent musician, an excellent singer, and someone I reflect a lot with. No, he's not the person I was talking about today. This guy's actually got his head screwed on correctly. And I recommend you guys to pick up his new CD. I will put the link from Spotify in here on Patreon, and I will also put the link on my Facebook and Instagram today. Guys, lots of love, lots of peace. Master Sukuri, hit me up with some comments and some questions because we are here for one thing, capoeira. Lots of love, lots of peace, and lots of capoeira.